Hey y'all, I'm excited to be catching up with you today. So, got a thought for you slash question. So, when we think about triggers and we think about sexually acting out, often what we're talking about is loneliness and lust, but not so much anger. So, we're going to be talking about that a little bit more today, and we brought along an expert. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I have Gene back. And Gene, welcome back. Glad to have you.
Hey, thanks, Luke. Glad to be back.
Gene, I don't know. I think I've told you a little bit, but that last podcast you did, it went over really well. I don't know. Did I give you very much feedback on that?
You did a little bit, yeah.
Okay. The things that people really resonated with, off the top of my head, was just your ability to be able to get vulnerable and share your sexual experiences and some stuff inside your history. And people are like, wow, he is really open. And that was really helpful because I think I was able to glean and probably lose some shame just listening to Gene talk. Do you have any response to them for the men that said that kind of thing?
I just love that you could see yourself in my story, and yes, just honor your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's jump into the subject here. For those of you who don't know Gene, Gene is a coach here at Choose Recovery Services. So he works with men and he does a lot of what we call story work. So you can go feel free to scroll back and look at some of the previous podcasts he did and jump onto our site and learn more by checking out his profile. Gene, anything you want to say about yourself for people that don't know you?
I just am humbled that you're listening to us. And yeah, I care deeply about this kind of work and have a lot of respect for the listeners who are really taking their recovery seriously.
I can tell you really love to talk about yourself. You're like, can we just move on to the subject, Luke? Okay, let's do that. And I'm the same way, Gene. One of the things I want to talk about to set us up in this podcast for just a moment here is we're going to talk about this word lust and also anger. And this, I think 3.5 to 4 out of our listeners out of 10 are women and they're the people that were been betrayed. So just recognize this can be really painful. And I want to have empathy around that for the person that hurt my partner of, in reality, what actually happens inside of our brain. These cycles are painful to listen to for both people. So when we think about triggers and we think about sexually acting out, loneliness comes up and lust comes up, but not so much the anger piece. So I know you're passionate about this, Gene. Do you want to kick this thing off for us?
Yeah, and perhaps I could start us with a little bit of a story to paint a picture. So my wife and I, we like to do date nights and we switch off who decides what we do for date night. And I decided we do an at-home date night. The kids are asleep. And I decide to start practicing guitar so my wife and I could sing together. And my wife's much better at singing than me. So I get to be like a Dancing with the Stars or something, just like a novice who gets to sing with a rock star. And I really love it. And she loves singing. So I pick a song that I know she's going to love this song. And I'm practicing it for an hour. And we decide we're going to do date night at 9 p.m. And at 9 p.m., I see she's still working on her computer. And I say, hey, how much time do you need? Oh, sorry, honey, I'm almost done. Just give me a little bit more time. I'm almost done. Okay, great. For me, that's good because I'm not great at guitar. So this is more practice time for me. So I just keep practicing guitar. And then a little bit more time passes and I say, hey, how are you doing over there? She's still working on her computer. And I've got the customer service person. Sorry, they're putting me on hold and they've transferred me twice. And really, this will be wrapped up soon. So I'm waiting, but I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm going to keep practicing guitar. We're going to have a great duet. It's going to be great. And then she comes, sits on the couch. It's close to our bedtime at this point, and she just looks at me and says, "I'm sorry, but if you're planning a song that we're going to sing together, I just am really not in the mood."
Mm.
And my heart drops, and I just say, "Okay." And that's about all I could get out of my mouth. And right here, I kind of decide that date night is canceled. And my wife didn't want to cancel date night. She said, perhaps we could do something else, something simple, maybe read in bed, do something together. But I just canceled date night. I was so angry. And what was under that anger is a disappointment, because I had this fantasy about that we would be singing this duet, and this fantasy was now not going to happen. And that made me angry. So my wife was going to get nothing from me, no goodness from me, no love. And I was just very cold after that. So here we can already see that there's a fantasy of wanting something, but then as soon as I don't get what I want, what's right there is anger. And who's going to pay? My wife is going to pay. And how am I going to pull it off? That it's her fault, because it's her fault. She was working, and she said 9 o'clock, and then 45 minutes later, she was still working. So it was her fault that I'm angry. So she kind of deserves what she's about to get, which is just nothing good for me.
Are you levels of awareness around she deserves this? Were you aware of what you were feeling?
Oh, yes. It was probably not until hindsight that I could actually identify just how much I was blaming her for my anger, and that I was withholding. It actually took a while for me to be able to name that what I'm doing in this moment is a form of relational violence, where all of a sudden my wife still wants to have date night. She still wants to spend time together, but I'm so fixated on my fantasy that I've been lusting for that I'm just pissed that I can't get it. And I'm just going to screw it. The night's over. Nothing more will come for me. And this actually is violent. And I name it as violence because otherwise I'm a minimizer. And I would say, well, yeah, that was her. That was on her. She decided to work late.
Wow. Okay. Can I highlight a couple things, Gene? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So this started in fantasy. And you just said something. You're like, I lusted after that fantasy, but the fantasy wasn't sexual.
Right. It was
Right?
more like a romantic relational fantasy.
So how would you describe lust? Because I think we're used to talking about lust that just existing in sexuality. How would you define lust?
Yes. So I'm defining lust as a desire that has become obsessive, possessive, consumptive, almost like a fixation that is kind of rigid. We lust over romance. We lust over like a certain kind of relationship. And in this case, I'm lusting over a certain kind of date night. And when things don't go my way, what's right there, lust is feeding into my anger.
I don't want to get us too off track from where you're having us go today, Gene, but we talk a lot about objectification. So objectification was already taking place. This is what's going to happen. This is how my wife's going to respond. By the way, super cool. You guys' dates night consist of a guitar and a duet. I know I didn't have that, but it is so much different than date nights that I'm used to. I'll deal with that level of shame.
If you saw my strumming, it's pretty subpar, but I know that in hindsight, I wasn't really being loving, because if I was really being loving, then I very quickly would have moved to be with my wife where she was at. And okay, yes, let's do a different date night. Let's do a spa day together, or I'll give you a massage, or that would be loving. But actually, I can see that this is lust, because when I don't get my way, what I fantasized about, I become totally self-centered.
Wow. So what was the environment that needed to exist for that to happen? Why was it lust and not something else in that moment?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Luke, because when I was preparing for date night, there was something very sweet about it.
Uh-huh. That's
But
what I was thinking.
what a sweet gesture.
What a sweet gesture.
And perhaps it is important to note that lust has to grab onto something of like a good desire. So I had this really good desire on my heart where I wanted to harmonize, like literally, with my wife. But then there was a sort of perversion where when she didn't want to do what I wanted, then all of a sudden I fixated on me.
Mm. Yeah, which is not uncommon. And I'm thinking about the last episode we released was around ADHD, or at least a couple of them ago, and how that's a hyperfixation. Like ADHD, you think somebody couldn't focus with it, but there's hyper focus. There's like this, the rest of the world doesn't exist, right? It's hyper focus. Anyway, it just draws me to that.
Mhm. Yes, you're drawing us to how, in this case, I'm really hyper focused on the fantasy and
Mm.
what I want. And I've lost sight of, well, what's actually my wife's desire? Because when you're in relationship, you've got to dance with that both of you have a desire.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a way to dance with both desires?
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. So tell us how this evolves, would you, Gene?
Mhm. Yes. So I got angry at my wife. And here I start to actually, my lust starts to kick in. So, lust, you can see, feeds into anger, but then anger feeds into lust, which will then feed back into anger. So, if you can actually start to see the cycle, it's quite vicious. In this case, my lust starts to kick in and I start to have more sexual fantasies. But these are fantasies that uh, I'm having with myself as almost like a form of revenge against my wife. So,
Can I
eh,
jump in there?
yes,
And if you're about to do this, I'm sorry, but slow it down for us. How do you go from anger to lust again? What happens?
yeah. So, in anger, if the anger is used violently or aggressively, where you're really cutting off someone, especially if it's you're cutting off your partner, all of a sudden you're going to find yourself feeling empty. And even though your anger may find some level of like, well, at least I got payback, you're now going to be alone and you're going to feel very distant. And that all that emptiness and deprivation will be the breeding ground to need to fantasize because we fantasize about what we don't have. So in this case, I'm like fantasizing about, again, having that connection, but there's anger that's underlining the connection because I've cut off my wife at this point.
Mm. There's this part, Gene, where I'm distracted for a moment. So if you could bear with me, where you said cut off. Yeah, cut my partner off. I want to also allow words to exist like I wall off, like I shut down, like I shut myself off. Because anger and cut off are like almost aggressive in nature. And I think about a lot of the people that I'm around don't really come across as like aggressive and they don't see themselves as aggressive. But cut off or walled off is what we're talking about. Cut off and walled off are interchangeable. And anger, which flows from that, is technically just how would we define anger where it's, I don't want to minimize it, Gene, and make it less intense, but how would somebody relate to it more? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, it does. So the most common way that I will show anger and use it against my wife is I will do that. I'll create a wall. I'll simply withhold. I'll
Oh,
withhold my honesty. I'll withhold my vulnerability. And in withhold,
transparency.
yep, no, yep, she just will not get anything from me. I just won't be loving. I won't be kind. I won't be empathetic. There'll be a wall.
So you're describing that as like anger in a response.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for letting us slow that down there.
Yes, and I would even name that walling off, that withholding is like an intentional wanting to suffocate my wife. Like she will not breathe in any of my love.
Yeah, punish her. Punish her.
And I just do it in a way that is kind of socially acceptable, where I
Mm.
don't look very bad. Like I don't look like a bad husband,
Oh, for sure.
but really in this moment, I'm being an incredibly bad husband. I mean,
Well, it's extremely abusive because like we think about, I'm just going to go to the story that you shared. You started with it, not me, but you could come across as like such the victim here of like, oh, I was trying to create a song and a duet, and then I shut her off and wall her off, and it's not my fault. It's not, very powerlessness to that. That's what you come across as. But yeah, it's to punish and hurt the person that hurt me.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break for a moment. I want to let you know of some things that we have coming up at Choose Recovery Services.
At Choose Recovery, we do a lot of intensives, but there is one in particular that I am so excited about. It is the Rebuilding Us Intensive. And this is for couples who have been through betrayal, but have put in a lot of work and are ready to dive into some deeper emotional work. But they feel like there's something missing, that they need that extra support to take their relationship to the next level. So this intensive is going to be in Phoenix, Arizona, March 26th to 29th. So it'll be a gorgeous time of year, depending on where you're at in the world. Come get some sunshine. What we'll be doing is we'll be using tools from emotionally focused therapy, doing the Hold Me Tight workshop, intermixed with lots of experiential activities, things like drum making and rappelling and different activities that are going to allow you an opportunity to really see each other, work together, and come and build something brand new. Because that's what we're doing here is we're not trying to go back to the way the relationship was. We're not trying to go back to old patterns. No, we're trying to break those patterns that weren't working and do something different and get that deeper level of intimacy. So if that's something that you would like in your relationship, you can go to chooserecoveryservices.com. Under intensives, you'll see the intensives for the whole year, but this one again is the Rebuilding Us Intensive. And you can come hang out with myself and Hallie Roderick, Morgan Ellsworth, and Luke Gordon. It will be a small, intimate group, so you will get lots of one-on-one support, along with being able to connect with others who are on the journey with you. If you would like to join us, we would love to have you register by February 28th. You can use the promo code RebuildUs500 and you'll get that $500 off. Again, it's just through February 28th. And cool thing about this, we also have payment plans available if needed, which you can reach out to info@chooserecoveryservices.com to learn more.
Let's get back to our episode.
So we have lust that feeds into anger, and then we have anger that feeds into lust. So you really have to be paying attention to both. Where there's lust, you really got to look, well, where's the anger here? And where there's anger, you got to be on the lookout for lust. I remember during my young days, I had no friends in high school, and this was a really tough time for me. And I don't consider myself an angry person. At many places in my life, I would say that I didn't even have anger, but really that anger was just so subtle and so pushed down that I just couldn't recognize it as anger. But where I saw the anger was in my sexual fantasies. And so I had a lot of anger at my classmates in high school. And I would actually have fantasies where I would humiliate classmates in my fantasy. So you can see here that anger is creating the kind of breeding ground for lustful fantasy.
So good. So good is in so important to recognize. And I'm thinking about the type of pornography that is often viewed. So much of it involves a power dynamic, right? Whether it's rape porn, lust porn, not lust porn, force porn, those types of things, familial porn, family-based porn, where somebody has influence over another person. It's in essence to get my needs met in powerful ways, to take my power back.
Yes. And I think you put that so well, Luke, because if that is the kind of porn you're watching it or fantasies that you're having, this kind of violent kind of porn, you need to be looking at anger. And if you're looking at anger, you need to be looking at where do you feel utterly powerless and helpless in your life?
What if I don't feel like I'm angry, Gene? What if I don't, what I'm like, I can't be anger. But I'm watching stuff that literally is around power dynamics. Is there any kind of prompt that we can give ourselves to open that door like a little bit? Because it's kind
Mhm.
of scary.
Yes. And as I said before, I didn't even consider myself an angry person until it all started coming out. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm actually a very angry person. It's just was coming out in such subtle ways that I just never thought of myself as an angry person. But we all have anger. And I think you put it so well, Luke, in a previous podcast about resentment, that it's so easy to be in denial about our anger. But if it's coming out in fantasy, that's
There you
your
go.
anger. And it's coming out sideways.
And that's where, not to take away responsibility and just to give some empathy to the betrayed partners that are listening to this. That's why it's so important to understand the person you're choosing to be relational with, of what their battle is, and not that you have responsibility over it, but you have understanding of the work that will need to be done to create safety in that relationship. Because if they don't have awareness over why the anger exists, how and why would it change? I think awareness around it is really important.
Mhm, mhm.
And the other piece to that is normalizing, but not condoning or accepting power-based dynamics in sexual behavior. I think a lot of people are going like, I'm so alone with this. I'm really the only person that people think's a good guy that is involved with content that is based like we're talking about today.
Right. And it is so common and sometimes not even the norm of what someone will watch. Like they'll watch a lot of other kinds of porn, but then there are times when they're really feeling that powerlessness where their anger just wants to come out in the form of sexual fantasy.
Yeah. And it's so cool. I'll use this word because of how I feel about the work, to be able to understand why you watch what you watch and then all of a sudden have it taking on new meaning. Like you said, I didn't know I was angry until I actually started process stuff, and I was angry. I can't imagine what it was like trying to get traction before that point.
Yes. And I think you put it well, to normalize, not condone necessarily, as really what we're looking at is someone who is dealing with powerlessness and likely a vast amount of disappointment in their lives. And that disappointment needs to be grieved. Oftentimes, anger will be right in the way of grief.
Wow. That was our last podcast, Gene. That's the one we did. We did earlier. The last one that Choose Recovery Services released was grief. Like
Mm,
it has to be a part of the process. You can't move through it without grieving that.
yes, so important.
Yeah. Okay. What's other parts of this dynamic that we should know about, Gene?
When we talk about anger, I think it's really important to notate whether it's anger directed at your partner or others, or is it anger directed at yourself? And that's going to help us see where can you expect that your lust is going to be moving. If you feel like it's your partner, they've done something to make you angry, you really got to be on the lookout for entitlement, that you actually feel some level of, well, they're always the one controlling our sex life. They've got all the power and I have these needs and they don't care about my needs. So all of a sudden we're moving into the entitlement to sexually act out because I've got to get my needs met. I need some excitement in my life. And subtly there's a form of revenge that's happening against my partner because they're the one that's controlling my needs and blocking me from getting my needs met.
Blocking me from getting my needs met. I can't get them met. They're in the way. And if they would only get out of the way or comply, then my needs would get met. Yeah. The powerless place.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you know the difference between I'm actually feeling anger for myself versus I'm feeling anger for my partner? How do you know the difference?
Yeah. You look at, is there self-hatred at play? Is there an impulse to punish yourself? And this, for my sexually acting out history, this was very common where I just really hated myself. And it came out in my lust, that my lust was largely driven by me just feeling like this beat puppy who was worthless and just needed to be punished. So I would I have a story actually where
Yeah.
I'm a business partner and we were doing a business together in college, and I had so much excitement and joy that came from this partnership. And we're sitting down at lunch and he just looks at me and he knows that I'm going to not like this, but he says, I can't do it anymore. I'm going to focus on a different business with a different friend. And in that moment, and I just said something like, oh, yeah, it's good. Don't worry. Really just minimizing all my disappointment. But actually, I'm so angry. But I wasn't angry at him. I was really just angry at myself for being the guy who didn't get chosen, for again, being the guy who the other person didn't want to be friends with. And I really just felt like whoever the other friend is, was just, they were just, there was more to them. And that's why he wanted to continue investing all his time and energy with that friend, but not with me. So in my self loathing, I went straight to porn. I just it wanted to, in some way, say, well, no one cares anyways. What does it matter? Screw it. You know, it was really a form of self-hatred that drove me to porn and sexually acting out, compared to the entitlement if you're finding your in anger at your partner.
Mm.
So this is something that you really just got to be on the lookout for, the role of shame and anger working together against yourself.
So highlight for us again, because I found that to be really powerful, the problem with misplaced anger. Why is it so problematic if it's misplaced?
Yeah. When anger is misplaced, it becomes so messy. You all of a sudden are harming your partner and harming yourself. And so if you're harming your partner, you're just going to feel very lonely and isolated and distant. And then if you're harming yourself, then your that shame will just viciously be consuming you.
Mm.
So that anger has to be discerned. We actually have to separate the anger. And I say separate because there's a lot of shaming of anger, and a lot of people believe that they should not experience anger, that if they act on their anger, it's always a bad thing. But really, at anger's core, there's a longing for the restoration of justice, repairing what is broken. So we can actually separate anger out into that there's a part of anger that actually is good. I like to call it a righteous anger. And this part of your anger, it wants to be your biggest advocate. It actually wants to advocate for your dignity, your worth. So when you feel your dignity being attacked, actually your anger is going to come out and you'll often want to attack back. But you got to recognize that actually your anger doesn't want to kill off your partner.
Mm-hmm.
It wants to advocate for your own dignity. And if you can do that, if you can allow your anger to advocate for your dignity, then you can actually get back in connection and empathy with your partner.
What does that righteous anger look like? How are you advocating for yourself? Because that sounds like scary stuff to talk about. Because it's like, how do I show up? Yeah, what does righteous anger look like? Can you give us examples?
Yes. And it's such a good question, Luke, because I'm not talking about being defensive. There's actually a difference between advocating for your dignity and defending yourself, which is really very common when partners argue. And being defensive is usually not helpful. But anger is like the emotion that is a catalyst for change. So if you can actually use your anger wants to say no to dysfunction. How it advocates for your worth is simply it's wanting to fight for you. So to see yourself as someone worthy to fight for may take work. And quite frankly, you're going to have to deal with your shame. And that would be probably a whole podcast series just around shame and shame resilience. But in this case, can you use your anger to say, actually, I am angry that there's this dysfunctional dynamic in my partnership. And if you can see that, you actually can join your partner's anger. What's very common is for a betrayed partner will be angry after sexually acting out. Can you actually join your partner and say, yeah, I'm angry about that too. That's a betrayal of myself when I sexually act out. And it's a betrayal of my partner. We both need to be angry at this and to use that energy to say no to the dysfunction.
That's cool. Dude, this is game changing. Like if you join with your partner in anger, and I recognize that can feel like in a moment, that can feel like you're hurting yourself more by not standing up for yourself and joining them. But that's not really the case. I love it when people say anger is like the bodyguard of another emotion. It's something more tender. And I think about giving anger that voice. If I do it in a healthy, safe way, it's actually taking good care of me because it's pointing out something that really, really matters. That's really important that hasn't been addressed and isn't getting addressed. So yeah, I love what you're talking about.
And I think that's so well put, Luke, as oftentimes when I give space to a client to allow their anger to get that voice of what it's trying to fight for, oftentimes the anger will move aside and that other emotion will be right there. And oftentimes that client will break down in tears as there's so much to grieve in the vast amount of disappointment that they're experiencing.
Mm. You know what it reminds me of? Anger kind of reminds me of that for Halloween last year. I did that thing where I bought dry ice and I poured a pitcher of a root beer and I put the dry ice in the root beer. And then, but it was only like the pitcher was only like half full. And then I put a lid on it and all you could see was the fog or whatever you call it.
Wow.
Like right there at the top with the lid on it. You couldn't tell there was any root beer in there. And then when you let the lid off, then the fog kept coming, but you could see the root beer now. And I think about anger being that thing where there's something really valuable underneath it, but you have to take the lid off first. And then you can see what's underneath it. But if you leave it there, it's just going to be covering up something that actually really matters. But it draws attention to what actually matters. Anyway, I had that visual in my mind as I listened to you talk about that.
Yes. And it does really matter. And I just want to acknowledge the challenge with anger as it is such a dangerous emotion as well. And it has done so much harm. So it can be so scary. And fear and anger are very related emotions. So I just want to acknowledge that and that we're really encouraging a listener to separate the anger. So not just to indulge in the anger, which if you're not separating it, a sort of violent desire to cut someone off. And that's often your partner, but it's not what all the anger wants to do. So can you actually separate it and keep the part that wants to advocate for your dignity, advocate for your partner's dignity too, and be a catalyst for change and saying no to abuse, no to neglect, no to harm, in the perpetuation of harm.
So solid. This has been really enlightening today. Thank you so much for joining us again. I really appreciate the message you always have to share and your energy and what you deliver it. And I know our listeners, I've gotten a lot of feedback from them. They do too. Any other closing thoughts, Gene?
I feel like this is messy work, whether you're in addiction recovery or betrayal trauma recovery. It's such messy work. So I just hope that whichever camp you're in, that you can have some grace, that there will be messiness, that you'll be messy, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, and don't do it by yourself. Please don't do it by yourself. Show up in an environment with somebody like Gene. That stuff is to be let loose with somebody that's safe, that creates that safety so it can look different. I think often I wanted to do that on my own and couldn't. So anyway, we're here to support you. Thanks again, Gene.
Thank you, Luke.
Hey guys, I am super excited to talk to you about our latest intensive that we have coming up. It's called Men's Journey to Wholeness. Prior to this, many of you attended Unmasked, and Men's Journey to Wholeness is the next level of recovery. It's more of phase 2 recovery. It's a relationship with self, so we can have a relationship with others. You're welcome to join us in the beautiful Spanish Fork area, and we are going to be having this on March 12th through the 14th. But let me tell you a little bit about it. It's a 3-day intensive. There's going to be a lot of transformational connection going on. That's going to be the focus. we're going to dive into the work. We're open to all men, so whether you attended the Unmasked Intensive or not, it's okay. But the focus is we're going to be building deeper relationship with yourself. A lot of times men are trying to kill that part of them that made these horrible choices. They don't like that part of them. We're going to identify that part of us, and we're going to allow us to see something that we haven't seen before. We're going to learn about how your protective parts protect and how they've shielded you from things and how they're still shielding you from things. And we're going to release some of those burdens. The principles are inspired by the book, No Bad Parts. There's going to be activities. There's going to be experiential workshops. There's going to be hands-on exercises. There's going to be a lot of guided support. There'll be a couple surprises. You won't be sworn to secrecy, but it's going to be pretty fun to see everybody engage in the type of activities we have coming up for you. And let me tell you what a fair outcome might be if you decide to do something like this. By the end of the intensive, you're going to be able to embrace a part of yourself that maybe you haven't before and have some awareness around it. Much deeper connection with yourself and removing some of those barriers that keep you isolated. Also unburden yourself from the heaviness of the secrets. The secrets might be out there, but the burden of sharing parts of you that you just don't feel like you can share with other people. We'll give you some direction on how to sign up. Space is limited. I hate saying that. Definitely want you to hurry to registration. Reach out to us if you have questions. We will give you more information about how to sign up in the notes of this podcast and on our website. Hopefully we can see you there.
Are there times you feel overwhelmed at the amount of resources and books available for betrayal trauma and addiction? Do you ever wonder where to start? Are you looking for a safe space to explore and process the various aspects of recovery? I'm Rachel Strong-Smith, and I am offering a group for women to come together to study and discuss a specific recovery book written by a professional in this field. This psychoeducational group will meet twice a month for a period of 3 months and be filled with group insights about the book that we are reading. As a social worker, I will facilitate the group by creating a space to explore questions and conversations, perspectives, and applications of the reading. There are many rich sources of information out there. Learning and growth are strengthened in community. Let's discover how these many resources can add to our life and the recovery process. Head over to chooserecoveryservices.com for more information and to sign up. I look forward to seeing you there.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there what we can do is set up a quick conversation to meet. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.